My son looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, let's go for a picnic, just the three of us." I thought it was a peace offering. I thought we were finally going to fix our broken family. Instead, they drove me deep into the Catskills forests, where the cell service dies and the shadows grow long. They told me to take a nap under an old oak tree while they set up the food. But when I woke up, the silence was deafening. No car, no son, no daughter-in-law, just the cold wind and the realization that I had been left there to die. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they were abandoning a helpless old man. They forgot that for 40 years I was the most ruthless risk assessment officer in New York City. And when I finally crawled my way back to civilization 3 days later, bloody and broken, I discovered the true horror. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had already held my funeral. My name is Garrison Ford, and this is how I came back from the dead to destroy the monsters I raised. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from those you hold closest, like this video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you think family is defined by blood or by loyalty. The air inside the SUV was set to 68 degrees, but I was sweating. It was a cold sweat, the kind that prickles at the back of your neck, when your instincts are screaming that something is wrong, but your heart refuses to believe it. We had been driving for 3 hours, heading north from the city into the dense green embrace of the Catskill Mountains. My son Bradley was behind the wheel. He was gripping the leather steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. Every few minutes, he would glance at me in the rearview mirror and then quickly look away, his eyes darting back to the winding road. Beside him sat his wife, Monica. She was tapping furiously on her phone, shielding the screen with her hand every time I leaned forward. The rhythmic clicking of her acrylic nails against the glass was the only sound in the car aside from the hum of the engine. "Are we almost there, son?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. My throat felt dry. Bradley flinched. "Yeah, Dad. Just a little further. There is a spot Monica found online. It is supposed to be very secluded. Perfect for a reset." A reset. That is what they called this trip. A chance to start over after months of tension. Bradley is 38 years old, but sometimes I still see the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. Now, however, he looked haggard. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and he had gained weight, the kind of bloat that comes from stress and cheap alcohol. He had lost his job 6 months ago, a fact he tried to hide from me until the foreclosure notices started piling up at his door. Monica turned around, then flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It is beautiful up here, isn't it, Garrison? No cell service, no distractions, just us." I looked out the window. The trees were thick here, pressing in on the road like the bars of a cage. She was right about the signal. My old phone had displayed no service for the last 20 miles. It is peaceful. I agreed, though the word felt like a lie in my mouth. I noticed something then. A small detail, but in my line of work, details are the difference between success and bankruptcy. There was a barcode sticker on the passenger side window. "Is this a rental, Bradley?" I asked. "I thought you drove the Explorer." Bradley coughed, clearing his throat nervously. "Oh yeah. The Explorer is in the shop. Transmission issues again. We rented this for the weekend." Better safe than sorry, right? Safe. That word echoed in my head. Why rent a generic black SUV for a family picnic? Why not ask to borrow my car? And why did the car smell of industrial cleaner as if it had been scrubbed of any identity? I sat back, sinking into the seat. My mind drifted to the events of last week. Monica had come over to my small townhouse in Queens. She was frantic, holding a stack of papers. "Dad, we found a better health insurance plan for you," she had said, her voice pitching high. "It covers everything, even long-term care. But the deadline is today. We need you to sign now." I had left my reading glasses in the bedroom. I trusted them. I trusted Bradley. So I signed. I signed page after page, my signature scrawled across lines I couldn't clearly read. Now looking at the back of Monica's head as she texted someone in a place with no signal, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. What exactly had I signed? "Okay, we are here," Bradley announced abruptly, pulling the car off the pavement onto a dirt track. The vehicle bounced over roots and rocks, driving deeper into the woods than any casual picnicker would go. "This seems a bit deep in, doesn't it, son?" I asked, gripping the door handle. "We want privacy, Dad," Monica said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Don't ruin it." Bradley stopped the car in a small clearing. The trees here were ancient, their branches weaving together to block out most of the afternoon sun. It was dim and cool. "Let's set up," Bradley said, his voice trembling slightly. We got out. My legs were stiff. At 67, I am not as agile as I used to be, though I keep myself in shape. I stretched, hearing my knees pop. Bradley opened the trunk, but instead of a picnic basket, he pulled out a thick wool blanket and a thermos. "Where's the food?" I asked. "Monica is getting it from the cooler in the back seat," Bradley mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Here, Dad. Why don't you sit down? You look pale." I did feel a bit lightheaded. The car ride had been long and winding. I allowed Bradley to spread the blanket at the base of a massive oak tree. I sat down, leaning my back against the rough bark. "Here," Monica said, appearing above me. She held out a plastic cup filled with an orange liquid. "Drink this. It is electrolytes. It will help with the dizziness." I took the cup. It looked like orange juice, but it smelled slightly metallic. I looked at Monica. Her face was a mask of tight concern. I looked at Bradley. He was standing by the car, wiping sweat from his forehead, even though it was a cool 60 degrees in the shade. "Thanks," I said. I took a sip. It was bitter. Surprisingly bitter for orange juice. "It is organic," Monica said quickly, noticing my hesitation. "No added sugar. Just drink it, Garrison. It is good for you." I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to be the difficult old man they always complained about. So I drank it. I drank it all. Within minutes, the world began to soften at the edges. My limbs felt heavy as if lead weights had been sewn into my clothes. The sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant bird calls began to stretch and distort. "I am tired." I slurred my tongue, feeling too big for my mouth. "Just take a nap, Dad." Bradley's voice sounded far away. "We will wake you when the food is ready. Just close your eyes." I tried to keep them open. I tried to look at my son, to ask him why he was crying, because I could see tears streaming down his face as he stood over me. But Monica put a hand on his shoulder and pulled him away. "Let him sleep." "Bradley," she whispered, her voice cold and hard like flint. "Let him sleep." The last thing I saw before the darkness took me completely was the blurry image of my son turning his back on me, walking toward the rental car while his wife checked her watch. When I opened my eyes, it was pitch black. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was in my bed at home having a nightmare. I tried to reach for the bedside lamp, but my hand hit damp earth and dry leaves. The memory rushed back like a physical blow. The picnic. The bitter juice, the nap. "Bradley," I croaked. My voice was a wreck, harsh and dry. Silence. I pushed myself up to a sitting position. My head throbbed, a rhythmic pounding behind my eyes that made me nauseous. I blinked, trying to adjust to the darkness. The moon must have been behind the clouds, because the forest was an abyss of shadows. Bradley Monica. I felt around me. The wool blanket was gone. I was sitting on the dirt. I patted my jacket pocket. My phone. I needed my phone. Empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I checked my other pockets. My wallet, which I always kept in my inside blazer pocket, was gone. My keys were gone. Even my watch, a vintage Omega that Clara, my late wife, had given me for our 30th anniversary, was missing from my wrist. They had stripped me. I stood up, swaying dangerously. I shouted my son's name again, screaming it until my throat burned. Bradley, don't do this. This is not funny. But there was no answer. Only the wind moving through the trees, sounding like a mournful sigh. I stumbled toward where the car had been parked. I fell to my knees, feeling the ground. Tire tracks. I could feel the deep ruts in the soft mud. They had driven off. They had left me here. The realization didn't come as a wave of sadness. It came as a shock of pure adrenaline. They had abandoned me. My own son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The man whose college tuition I had paid for in full. The man whose debts I had secretly covered more times than I could count. He had drugged me, robbed me, and left me in the middle of a forest, potentially miles from the nearest road. Why? The answer came to me in the darkness as clear as day. Money. It was always about money with them. But they didn't know. They didn't know the truth. For the last 5 years, I have lived a quiet life. I live in a modest 3-bedroom townhouse in Queens. I drive a 5-year-old sedan. I wear clothes from department stores. To Bradley and Monica, I am just a pensioner living off Social Security and a small 401k. They don't know that 5 years ago I sold my risk assessment firm Ford Risk Management for $10.5 million. I kept it a secret. It was Clara's idea before she passed. She saw how Bradley was becoming dependent, how he lacked drive. She said, "Garrison, if he knows we are rich, he will never work a day in his life. Let him build his own way." So I hid it. The money sits in a blind trust managed by my old friend and lawyer Saul Blackwood. I was waiting. I was waiting to see Bradley mature. I was waiting to see him take responsibility for his life, his gambling debts, his failed crypto investments. I was waiting for him to become a man worthy of that legacy. Instead, he became this, a coward who leaves his father to die in the woods. I sat there in the dark, shivering as the temperature dropped. The drugs were still in my system, making my thoughts sluggish, but the rage was burning them away. They thought I was helpless. They looked at my gray hair and my reading glasses and saw a victim. They forgot who I was. I spent 40 years analyzing worst-case scenarios for the biggest banks on Wall Street. I know how to calculate risk. I know how to survive disasters. I checked my situation. I was wearing a light jacket, sturdy leather shoes, and trousers. No water, no food, no fire starter. The temperature was likely to drop into the 40s tonight. Hypothermia was the immediate threat. I needed shelter. I couldn't steam in the clearing. It was too exposed. I felt my way to the base of the massive oak tree where I had woken up. I gathered as many dry leaves as I could, piling them into a mound. I buried myself in them, creating a layer of insulation. It wasn't comfortable. It was damp and smelled of decay, but it would trap my body heat. I curled into a ball, my knees to my chest. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the forest, listening to the scuttle of small animals, and the terrifying snapping of twigs that suggested larger predators. But mostly, I thought about my son. I thought about the paperwork Monica made me sign. It wasn't health insurance, was it? My mind raced through the possibilities. Power of attorney, transfer of deed, or perhaps something darker. A do not resuscitate order. If I died out here, it would be perfect for them. A tragic accident. An old man confused wandering off into the woods during a family outing. They would play the grieving children. They would inherit the townhouse, the small savings account they knew about. It wouldn't be millions, but it would be enough to pay off Bradley's immediate debts. They had calculated my value, dead versus alive, and decided I was worth more as a corpse. I clenched my fists in the dirt. No, I am not dying here. I am not letting them win. When the sun finally rose, filtering through the canopy in gray shafts of light, I was stiff and aching in every joint. My mouth tasted like bile. I crawled out of my leaf pile and took stock. The woods were dense. No trails. No markers. But I knew the basics. Water flows downhill. Water leads to larger streams. Streams lead to rivers. Rivers lead to towns. I started walking. I found a game trail, a narrow path worn by deer, and followed it downhill. My thirst was becoming a problem. The drug residue had dehydrated me. I found a small trickle of water running over mossy rocks. It was risky, Giardia is no joke, but I needed to keep my strength up. I cupped my hands and drank. The water was freezing and tasted of iron. I walked for hours. My mind drifted in and out of focus. I hallucinated Clara walking beside me in her yellow sundress, telling me to keep moving. "Garrison, you stubborn old goat," she whispered. "Move your feet." I moved them. By midday, my feet were blistered. My expensive leather shoes were not made for this terrain. I slipped on a wet rock and tumbled down a small ravine, tearing my pants and gashing my shin. The pain was sharp and hot, but I welcomed it. It kept me awake. I used a fallen branch as a cane. I kept moving. It was late afternoon on the second day when I heard it. The distant hum of an engine. I stopped holding my breath. It was faint but rhythmic. A chainsaw, or maybe a generator. I changed direction, moving toward the sound. I had to climb a steep ridge, pulling myself up by tree roots, my fingernails filling with dirt. When I crested the hill, I saw it. A small cabin down in the valley, smoke curling from the chimney. I didn't run. I couldn't run. I shambled down the slope, sliding more than walking. As I got closer, a dog started barking. A large man in a plaid shirt came out onto the porch, holding a shotgun loosely in his arm. "Help!" I croaked. I waved my hand. The man squinted, then lowered the gun. He ran toward me. "Holy smokes, mister. You look like you went 10 rounds with a bear." He caught me just as my legs finally gave out. His name was Miller. He was a trapper living off the grid. He didn't ask too many questions, which I appreciated. He gave me water, warm soup, and a place to sit by the fire. "I need to make a call," I said once I could speak clearly. "Please, it is life or death." "I don't have a landline," Miller said. "But I got a cell. Signal is spotty, but if you stand by the window, you might get 1 bar. He handed me a battered flip phone. I dialed Bradley's number first. My fingers trembled over the keys. It rang and rang. Then voicemail. "Hey, this is Bradley. Leave a message." The sound of his voice, so casual, so normal, made me want to scream. I hung up. I dialed the house phone. No answer. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I dialed my own number. I wanted to see if anyone was in my house. It rang twice and then someone picked up. Hello? It was Monica. Her voice sounded breathless, excited. In the background, I could hear noise, music, voices, the clinking of glasses. It sounded like a party. Monica, I said. There was a pause, silence on the line. Then a click. She hung up. She didn't scream, she didn't ask who it was, she just hung up. She knew. I looked at Miller. I need to get to New York. I will pay you. I have money. Not on me, but I can get it. Miller looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I am heading into town for supplies tomorrow morning. I can drop you at the bus station in Kingston. That night on Miller's couch, I didn't sleep. I formulated a plan. I couldn't just walk into my house. They were dangerous. They had crossed the line from ungrateful children to attempted murderers. If I showed up defenseless, they might finish the job. I needed information. The next morning, Miller drove me to Kingston. He gave me $20 for the bus. I promised him I would send him $1,000 as soon as I could. He just shrugged and said, "Pass it on." I arrived in the city in the evening. I looked like a homeless person. My clothes were torn and dirty. I had a beard stubble. I smelled of wood smoke and sweat. I used the last of Miller's money to buy a prepaid phone at a bodega and a large coffee. I sat on a bench in a park near my neighborhood and used the phone's data to search for my name. My hands shook as I typed Garrison Ford, Queens, NY. The first result was an obituary. Garrison Ford, 67, passed away suddenly this Tuesday following a tragic accident. He is survived by his loving son Bradley and daughter-in-law Monica. A private service will be held this Friday. Passed away. Tuesday. Today was Friday. I checked the time. It was 6 p.m. The service was today. I scrolled down. There was a news article from a local paper. Body of Queens man found in car crash. Police have identified the victim of a fiery crash on Route 28 as Garrison Ford. The vehicle reportedly lost control and went over an embankment, catching fire. Dental records were inconclusive, but personal effects found at the scene identified the victim. A fiery crash. They had staged a crash. They must have found a body, or maybe there was no body, just a burning car with my wallet and watch inside. They had faked my death. They had murdered me on paper. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my chest. It was insane. It was the kind of plot you see in movies, not in real life. But desperation makes people do insane things. Bradley and Monica were desperate. They needed the insurance payout. They needed the house. And they needed me gone. I stood up. I wasn't Garrison Ford anymore. Garrison Ford was dead. He had died in a fiery crash. The man standing in the park was a ghost. And ghosts are terrifying because they have nothing left to lose. I pulled up the hood of the oversized sweatshirt Miller had given me. I walked toward my townhouse. The street was lined with cars, expensive cars. I recognized the BMW of my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. I saw the sedans of a few of my old colleagues. I crept closer, sticking to the shadows. My front lawn was covered in floral wreaths. There was a large photo of me on an easel near the front door. It was a photo from 10 years ago when I still smiled with my eyes. The front door was open. I could hear the murmur of voices. I moved to the side of the house, peering through the living room window. The house was packed. People were wearing black, holding plates of food, drinking wine. It was a wake. And there, in the center of the room, was Bradley. He was wearing a black suit that looked brand new. He was holding a glass of whiskey. He was talking to a man I recognized as the local insurance agent. Bradley looked sad. He was dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. But I knew my son. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking the room, not with grief, but with anxiety. Monica was near the buffet table. She was wearing a black dress that was a little too tight, a little too revealing for a funeral. She wasn't crying. She was directing the caterers, pointing at trays of food, acting like the lady of the manor. They were hosting a party. My funeral was their housewarming party. I watched them. I watched the people who claimed to love me drinking my wine, eating my food, mourning a box of ashes that wasn't me. I saw Bradley check his watch. He leaned in and whispered something to Monica. She smiled. A quick, sharp smile of victory. They thought they had pulled it off. They thought the nightmare was over. I stepped back from the window into the darkness of the alleyway. I didn't go in. Not yet. I needed allies. I needed resources. I was legally dead, which meant my bank accounts would be frozen or in the process of being transferred. I couldn't access my money the normal way, but I wasn't a normal pensioner. I turned and walked away from my own wake. I headed toward the subway. I needed to get to Manhattan. I needed to see Saul Blackwood. Saul was the only person who knew about the $10 million. He was the only one who knew about the blind trust. And he was the only one who could bring me back to life. But first, I had to convince him he wasn't seeing a ghost. As I sat on the rattling subway car, staring at my reflection in the dark window, a dirty, bruised old man with eyes burning like coals, I made a vow. Bradley wanted an inheritance. He wanted my money. I was going to give him something else entirely. I was going to give him a lesson in risk management. He had bet everything on me dying. He was about to lose everything because I survived. The third day was not a day. It was a fever dream suspended between life and death. My right leg had swollen to twice its size, the gash on my shin oozing a yellow fluid that smelled of sickness. I had stopped walking hours ago. Now I was crawling, dragging my body over the damp earth inch by agonizing inch. Hunger had hollowed me out, leaving a dull ache in my center, but thirst was the real killer. It made my tongue swell until it choked me. It made the forest spin. I saw Clara standing behind a birch tree, her face sad and pale. I knew she wasn't there. I knew if I stopped moving to talk to her, I would never get up again. Risk assessment. Probability of survival without intervention, 0. I collapsed near a ridge, my cheek pressed against the cold mud. I was ready to close my eyes. I was ready to let the darkness take me. And then I heard it. The snap of a twig. Not the wind. Not a squirrel. A heavy boot breaking wood. I tried to shout, but only a dry wheeze escaped my lips. I forced my head up. A figure loomed over me. A giant of a man in a flannel shirt holding a rifle. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a steel trap clamped around the leg of a rabbit a few feet away. Help! The word was a whisper, a ghost of a sound. But he heard it. The man spun around, his rifle raised. When he saw me, a heap of rags and blood in the dirt, his eyes went wide. He didn't ask questions. He didn't recoil. He dropped his gear and ran to me. "Easy there, old-timer," he grunted, his voice rough like gravel. "I got you." He smelled of tobacco and pine resin. He lifted me as if I weighed nothing. For the first time in 72 hours, I felt warmth. I felt human contact. It was so overwhelming that I wept silent tears that cut clean tracks through the dirt on my face. His name was Miller. He drove an old battered pickup truck that rattled with every bump in the dirt road, but to me it felt like a luxury limousine. He gave me water from a canteen, warm and metallic, but it tasted like life. "Where are we going?" he asked, his eyes on the road. "Hospital is 40 miles out." "No hospital," I rasped. "No police, just a phone." "I need a phone." Miller looked at me sideways. He saw the expensive cut of my ruined jacket, the watch-tan line on my wrist. He probably thought I was a criminal or a fugitive. He didn't care. "In these woods, you mind your own business." "There is a gas station in Shandaken," he said. 5 miles. The drive was a blur of trees and sunlight. My mind was racing faster than the truck. I had to call Bradley. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they were looking for me. Maybe they were frantic with worry, searching the woods, calling my name. A part of me, the father in me, still wanted to believe it was an accident. A terrible misunderstanding. Miller pulled up to a dusty gas station with a single pump. He helped me out of the truck and handed me his cell phone. "It is prepaid," he said. "Make it count." My fingers were stiff, coated in dried blood and dirt. I dialed the number I had known by heart for 20 years. Bradley's cell. It rang. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. I held my breath. "Pick up, son. Please pick up. Tell me you are looking for me. Tell me you are sorry." The line clicked. "The subscriber you have called is not available. Please leave a message after the tone." Voicemail. He had screened the call. Or maybe his phone was off. Or maybe he just didn't care. I hung up. I didn't leave a message. What could I say? "I am alive. Why did you leave me?" I dialed the house number. The landline in our townhouse in Queens. The phone that sat on the mahogany table in the hallway. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. No voicemail. Just the endless hollow ringing echoing in an empty house. Panic began to set in. Not the panic of dying in the woods, but a different kind of terror. The terror of being erased. Miller was inside the station, paying for gas. I limped toward the glass window of the store. There was a rack of local newspapers, but they were days old. I needed information. I needed to know if there was a search party. I needed to know if I was a missing person. I went inside. The clerk, a bored teenager, didn't even look up from his phone. "Excuse me," I said, leaning against the counter to stay upright. "Can I use your computer?" "Please." "It is an emergency." The kid looked at me. He saw the blood on my leg. He saw the desperation in my eyes. He shrugged and turned a laptop toward me. "Knock yourself out." I typed my name into the search bar. My hands were shaking so hard I hit the wrong keys twice. Garrison Ford, Queens, New York. I expected to see a missing persons report. I expected to see a police bulletin. I did not expect to see my own face staring back at me from a digital obituary page. The headline hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air from my lungs. Tragic loss. Garrison Ford, 67. Dies in fiery car crash. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. It was impossible. I was standing here. I was breathing. I was alive. I scrolled down, my vision blurring. The article was from the Queens Gazette, dated yesterday. Authorities have identified the victim of a single vehicle accident on Route 28 as Garrison Ford. The vehicle, a rental SUV, lost control and plummeted down a ravine, bursting into flames upon impact. The body was burned beyond recognition, but was identified by personal effects, including a wedding ring and a vintage Omega watch found at the scene. My hand flew to my chest. my wedding ring, my watch. They had taken them. While I slept under that tree, drugged and helpless, they had stripped me of my jewelry. I thought they were just stealing them to pawn them. I was wrong. They stole them to plant them. They had staged a crash. They had driven the rental car off a cliff or into a wall with a body inside. A John Doe. A cadaver. Someone they could pass off as me. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had murdered me. Legally, I was dead. I looked at the date of the service. Tomorrow. My funeral was tomorrow. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a jagged, hysterical sound that made the clerk look up with alarm. They were burying me tomorrow. The realization washed over me cold and absolute. There was no misunderstanding. There was no mistake. This was a calculated execution. They had planned this for weeks, maybe months. The insurance papers, the rental car, the trip, Bradley, my son. The boy I held when he had nightmares. The boy I taught to shave. He had burned a stranger's body and called it his father just to get his hands on my money. I felt my knees give way. I grabbed the counter, my knuckles turning white. "Hey, mister, you okay?" the clerk asked, pulling the laptop back. I looked at him. I looked at Miller, who had just walked in. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the soda cooler. I saw a wild man, dirty, bloody, broken. But in my eyes, I saw something else. I saw the man who used to tear apart balance sheets for a living. I saw the man who could spot a flaw in a billion-dollar merger from a mile away. "I am fine," I said. My voice was steady, cold, dead calm. "I am better than fine." I turned to Miller. "I need a ride to the city," I said. Miller looked at the computer screen, then back at me. He saw the obituary. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. "Get in the truck." I walked out of that gas station. I left Garrison Ford, the victim, behind on that floor. The man who walked out was a ghost. And ghosts, as my son was about to learn, are very hard to kill. Miller dropped me off 2 blocks from the bus station in Kingston. He didn't say goodbye. He just nodded once, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat, and drove his rattled truck back toward the mountains that had almost claimed my life. I stood on the pavement, watching the dust settle, and I felt a strange sensation. I was invisible. To the people walking by, I was just another homeless drifter, a man in ruined clothes with a limp and a face smeared with dirt. No one looked me in the eye. No one saw Garrison Ford, the successful consultant. They saw a ghost. I bought a ticket to Port Authority with the cash Miller had given me. The bus ride was a blur of motion and nausea. I sat in the back, my head against the cold glass, watching the trees give way to suburbs, and the suburbs give way to the gray concrete sprawl of the city. Every mile closer to New York felt like tightening a noose around my neck. My instinct, the fatherly part of my brain that was slowly dying, wanted to rush straight to my house. I wanted to kick down the door and scream at them. I wanted to demand answers. But the risk assessor in me, the man who had spent 40 years predicting disasters, grabbed the wheel. If I walked into that house now, what would happen? They had already killed me on paper. They had identified a corpse. They had a death certificate. If a dead man walks through the front door, he doesn't get a hug. He gets a second bullet. They had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back for them, and if they saw me alive, panic would set in. Panicked people make sloppy, dangerous decisions. They might attack me. They might claim I was an intruder, a crazy imposter. I had no ID. I had no phone. I looked insane. The police might even believe them over me. No. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed to know the lay of the land. I needed intel. The bus pulled into the terminal, and the wall of noise and heat that is New York City hit me. I blended into the crowd, a shadow moving among shadows. I needed resources. I had $0 in my pocket, but I wasn't broke. I limped toward a public restroom, locking myself in a stall. I sat on the toilet lid and took off my left shoe. It was a sturdy leather brogue, now scuffed and water-damaged. I pried at the inner heel with my thumbnail. It was stiff, but it gave way. Years ago, after a business trip to a particularly unstable region in South America, I had developed a habit. Paranoia, some called it. I called it insurance. I had a cobbler on the Lower East Side modify all my shoes, a false heel hollowed out and lined with rubber. I pulled out the small, tightly folded packet wrapped in plastic. I unwrapped it. 20 bills, $100 each, $2,000 in emergency cash. I held the money in my trembling hands. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a lifeline. It was enough to buy time. I put the shoe back on, wincing, as the pressure hit my blisters. I left the terminal and hailed a cab, not a rideshare app, just a yellow cab. I told the driver to take me to a motel in Queens far away from my neighborhood, a place where they took cash and didn't ask for a driver's license. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. The carpet was sticky. The neon sign outside buzzed with a rhythmic electric hum that grated on my nerves. But it had a lock. It had a shower. I stood under the hot water for an hour. I scrubbed the dried blood from my leg. I watched the dirt of the forest swirl down the drain, taking the old Garrison Ford with it. When I stepped out and looked in the cracked bathroom mirror, I didn't recognize the man staring back. My face was gaunt, my eyes sunken and hard. My beard was white and rough. I looked 10 years older and 100 times meaner. I dressed in the cleanest clothes I had, which wasn't saying much. I took the cash and went to a nearby thrift store. I bought a pair of nondescript jeans, a gray hoodie, a heavy work coat, and a baseball cap. I bought a cheap pair of sunglasses. I put them on. I looked like nobody. I looked like everyone. I waited until evening. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the city. It was time. I took the subway to my neighborhood. I got off one stop early and walked the rest of the way. My leg was screaming in protest, but I forced myself to walk with an even gait. Limping drew attention. The street was quiet. It was a nice street lined with oak trees and well-kept lawns. It was the kind of street where people felt safe, where bad things didn't happen. As I turned the corner onto my block, I saw it. My house. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every window was glowing. Cars were parked bumper to bumper along the curb. Expensive cars, luxury sedans and SUVs. And there in the driveway was a large white tent. A reception tent. I felt bile rise in my throat. They weren't just having a small gathering. They were having a gala. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows of the neighbors' hedges. I knew this yard. I knew which floorboards on the neighbor's porch squeaked. I knew the gap in the fence. I slipped into the side yard of the house next door, Mrs. Gable's house. She was nearly deaf and went to bed at 7. I was safe here. I crouched behind the lilac bushes that separated our properties. I had a clear view of my own backyard and the side of the house. The patio doors were open. People were spilling out onto the lawn holding crystal glasses. I recognized faces. There was Bob from the Rotary Club. There was my dentist. There were neighbors I had waved to for 20 years. They were eating hors d'oeuvres. They were laughing. Laughing. At my funeral. And then I saw him. Bradley stepped out onto the patio. He was wearing a suit I had never seen before. It was a charcoal gray Italian cut, probably $3,000. It fit him perfectly. He held a Scotch glass in one hand. He wasn't crying. He wasn't slumped in grief. He was standing tall, chest out, holding court. A group of people surrounded him, offering condolences. He nodded solemnly, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. But the moment they turned away, the mask slipped. He took a sip of his drink, and I saw it glinting under the patio lights. A watch. Not just any watch. It was gold. Heavy. Chunky. Even from this distance, I recognized the distinctive bezel. A Rolex Daytona. I did the math in my head instantly. That watch cost at least $40,000 on the secondary market. Bradley didn't have $40 to his name last week. He checked the time. He didn't look at the watch face to see the hour. He looked at the watch itself. He turned his wrist, admiring the way the gold caught the light. He ran a finger over the sapphire crystal. It was a caress. He wasn't mourning me. He was wearing my death on his wrist. A surge of rage so hot it made my vision blur washed over me. I wanted to jump the fence. I wanted to strangle him. But then I saw her. Monica came out of the kitchen door. She was wearing a black dress that was tasteful but expensive. She held a clipboard. She was talking to one of the caterers, pointing at a tray of empty glasses and then gesturing sharply toward the bar. She looked annoyed, not devastated, annoyed that the service wasn't fast enough. She walked over to Bradley. She didn't hug him. She didn't offer him comfort. She leaned in close, her lips moving fast. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the body language. She was giving orders. Bradley nodded and downed the rest of his drink. He laughed at something she said. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He tossed them in the air and caught them. Car keys. The fob was distinct. It was the fob for a Porsche. I stared at the driveway. Tucked behind the catering van, partially hidden, was a brand new Porsche 911. Black. Convertible. They hadn't waited a week. They hadn't even waited until I was in the ground. They had spent the payout before the ink was dry on the death certificate. How? Life insurance takes time. Probate takes time. Unless they had access to cash. My mind raced. The emergency fund. I had a safe in the study hidden behind the books. It contained $50,000 in cash and some gold coins. It was for true emergencies, war, collapse of the banking system. Only I knew the combination. Or so I thought. I watched Bradley put his arm around Monica's waist. They looked at the house, my house, the house I had paid for with 40 years of stress and ulcers. They looked at it like conquerors surveying their new kingdom. I saw the look on Monica's face. It wasn't just greed. It was triumph. It was the look of someone who had pulled off the perfect crime. She surveyed the guests, the cars, the house, and she smiled. It was a small, cold smile. A smile of pure, unadulterated victory. She raised her glass in a silent toast to herself. I sank back into the dirt behind the bushes. My hands were gripping the roots of the lilac so hard my fingernails were bleeding. They weren't just bad children. They were sociopaths. They had erased me. They had replaced me with things. A watch. A car. A party. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. It wasn't for me. It was for the memory of the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. That boy was dead. He had died a long time ago, and I had been too blind to see it. The man standing on that patio was a stranger who had tried to kill me. I stayed there for an hour watching them. I cataloged every expense: the catering, the flowers, the valet parking. They were burning through money like it was oxygen. I realized then that my survival wasn't enough. Simply coming back wouldn't fix this. If I walked in there now, there would be a scene. There would be police. There would be a legal battle. They would claim I was crazy. They would claim I had faked my own death to frame them. They would use my money to hire lawyers to destroy me. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the risk assessor one last time. I needed to find the weak point in their structure, and I knew where to start. I watched Bradley check his new watch again. He looked impatient. He looked like a man waiting for the main event to be over so he could get to the real celebration. "Enjoy it, son," I whispered into the darkness. "Enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the watch. Because the bill is coming due." I backed away, crawling until I was clear of the yard. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my knees. I pulled my cap down low. I turned my back on my home. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene. I walked back toward the subway. I had one stop left to make tonight. I needed to see Saul. Saul Blackwood was my oldest friend. He was also the only man in New York who knew where the bodies were buried because he had drawn up the maps. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, but he was loyal. If anyone could help me rise from the grave, it was him. But I had to be careful. To Saul, I was dead too. If I scared him, if I shocked him too much, he might have a heart attack. Or worse, he might call Bradley. No, I had to approach this carefully. I checked my pocket. I still had $1,800, enough for a week in the motel, enough for food, enough for a burner phone and a laptop. I walked into the night, the sounds of my own wake fading behind me. The image of Bradley's gold watch burned into my retinas. That watch was the evidence. That watch was the first thread I was going to pull to unravel their entire tapestry of lies. I wasn't Garrison Ford, the victim. I was the uninvited guest, and I was about to crash the party. Manhattan at night is a beast that never sleeps, but for a man who officially ceased to exist 3 days ago, it felt like a graveyard of glass and steel. I stood across the street from the Blackwood Legal Building, staring up at the 42nd floor. The light was on. I knew it would be. Saul Blackwood didn't believe in office hours. He believed in billable hours and good scotch. He was the only man in this city who knew where every skeleton in my closet was buried because he had helped me dig the holes. I checked my reflection in a shop window. The disguise I had bought in Queens held up. With the baseball cap pulled low and the heavy coat bulking up my frame, I didn't look like Garrison Ford, the retired risk assessment expert. I looked like a shadow. I looked like one of the thousands of invisible men who haunt the streets of New York, ignored by the wealthy elite rushing to their galas. Getting into the building was the first hurdle. The lobby was guarded by security and turnstiles. In my former life, I would have walked in with a wave and a smile. Tonight, I had to use the service entrance. I knew the code. It was a risk. If they had changed it in the last 6 months, I would be stuck. But Saul was a creature of habit, and he hated changing vendors. The code for the cleaning crew was likely still the same. I punched in the numbers. The keypad beeped green. The lock clicked. I slipped inside, holding my breath. The service elevator was slow-smelling of ammonia and trash bags. As I ascended, the numbers on the display ticked up like a countdown. 30, 35, 40, 42. The doors opened onto a plush hallway lined with mahogany and expensive art. It was quiet. the silence of money working. I walked to the heavy double doors at the end of the hall. They were unlocked. Saul never locked his office when he was inside. He thought he was untouchable. I pushed the door open. Saul was sitting behind his massive desk, illuminated by the green glow of a banker's lamp. He was reading a file, his silver glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked older than I remembered. He looked tired. "Saul," I said. My voice was rough from the smoke and the screaming I had done in the woods. Saul didn't look up immediately. He froze, his hand hovering over the page. He knew that voice, but he knew that voice belonged to a dead man. He slowly lifted his head. When his eyes met mine, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he was having a heart attack. He dropped his pen. It rolled across the desk and fell onto the floor with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "Garrison," he whispered. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He backed away until he hit the bookshelf. His eyes were wide, terrified. He was looking at a ghost. A dirty, bloodied ghost standing in his pristine office. "I am not dead." "Saul," I said, walking further into the room. "I am not a ghost." Jesus Christ. Saul put a hand to his chest. "Garrison," they said. I went to the service. I saw the urn. It wasn't me, Saul. I reached the desk. I saw the bottle of Macallan 25 sitting on the sideboard. I poured myself a glass, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I drank it in one swallow. The burn was grounding. Saul stared at me. He walked around the desk, slowly reaching out a trembling hand. He touched my shoulder. He felt the solid mass of my arm. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "You are alive." "How?" "The police report. The crash. The identification." I sat down in one of the leather client chairs. My legs were throbbing. "Sit down, Saul. I need to know exactly what happened. I need to know how my son murdered me." Saul sank into his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked shaken, rattled in a way I had never seen him. Saul was a shark. Nothing rattled him. "Garrison, 2 days ago, the police found a rental SUV at the bottom of a ravine off Route 28 near the Catskills. It had gone through the guardrail and rolled down 100 feet. It caught fire. By the time the fire department got there, there was nothing left but charred metal and a body," I finished. Saul nodded. A body. Burned beyond recognition. Dental records were impossible. There was no DNA on file to match immediately. But they found personal effects. He opened the file on his desk and spun it around to face me. I looked at the crime scene photos. They were grainy black and white, but clear enough. There, in an evidence bag, was a watch. My watch. The vintage Omega with the cracked face. And next to it, a gold band. My wedding ring. Bradley and Monica went to the morgue. Saul said, his voice quiet. "They identified the items. They gave sworn statements. They said you had rented the car to go for a solo drive to clear your head. They said you had been acting strange lately, confused, depressed." I felt a cold smile tug at my lips. Confused, depressed. They were setting up the narrative. The senile old man who drove off a cliff. It was perfect. "Who was he, Saul?" I asked, pointing to the photo of the burned car. "Who was the man they burned?" Saul shook his head. "They don't know. A John Doe. A drifter, maybe. Someone Bradley picked up or found. Or maybe." He didn't finish the sentence. Maybe they killed him too. Maybe they found a homeless man, drugged him just like they drugged me, put him in the car and pushed it over the edge. It doesn't matter who he was, I said. To the world, he was me. That is the problem, Garrison Saul said, leaning forward. Legally, he is you. The death certificate was signed yesterday morning. It was rushed. Bradley pushed for an expedited process, claiming religious reasons. He wanted you to be at peace. At peace. He wanted the evidence destroyed. And the body, I asked. Cremated, Saul said. This morning, at 8 a.m. I closed my eyes. They had been thorough, ruthless. By cremating the body, they had destroyed the only physical evidence that the corpse wasn't me. There could be no exhumation, no second autopsy, no DNA test. I am ash in a jar, I whispered. Legally, yes, Saul said. And that brings us to the money. I looked at him. The blind trust. The $10 million. It is frozen, Garrison. The moment the death certificate was issued, the trust activation protocols kicked in. But because the beneficiary is your son and the trust was designed to transfer upon your death, the process has started. Can't you stop it? I asked. I am sitting right here. I am the grantor. Saul looked pained. I can stop it, but not instantly. You are legally dead. Your bank accounts are locked. Your credit cards are canceled. Your social security number is flagged as deceased. If I walk into a bank tomorrow and say Garrison Ford is alive, they will laugh at me. They will think I am part of a fraud. We need proof. We need to go to the police. We need to reverse the death certificate. That takes time. Weeks, maybe months. I don't have months, Saul. Bradley knows about the savings. He knows about the house he is already spending. I saw the Porsche. I saw the Rolex. Saul winced. He raided the emergency safe in the study, didn't he? Yes. And he is going to burn through everything else if we don't stop him. But there is something worse, Saul. Something I need you to check. What? The trust. The shadow trust. Saul's eyes went wide. The contingency plan. 10 years ago, when I set up the trust to hide my wealth, I added a clause known only to me and Saul. It was a fail-safe, a poison pill. It was designed for a scenario where I died under suspicious circumstances or where I was coerced into signing over my assets. The shadow trust clause stated that in the event of my sudden death, the assets would not transfer immediately. Instead, they would be placed in a 30-day holding period subject to an independent audit. During that time, the beneficiary would be granted access to a small stipend, but the bulk of the capital would remain untouchable. However, there was an override. If the executor of the estate could prove financial hardship or immediate necessity, the 30-day hold could be waived by the trust manager. You are the trust manager, Saul, I said. Did you waive the hold? Saul looked down at his hands. Garrison, you have to understand. Bradley came in here yesterday. He was a mess. He was crying. He said he had gambling debts. He said there were men threatening to kill him. He said they would come to the funeral. He begged me. He said it was what you would have wanted. To save his life. I felt a spike of betrayal, but I pushed it down. Saul was a lawyer, but he had a soft spot for Bradley. He had known him since he was a baby. Bradley had played him. He had used his own father's death to manipulate my oldest friend. Did you sign the waiver, Saul? Saul nodded slowly. I released the funds. The transfer is scheduled for next week. 7 days. 7 days. In 7 days, Bradley would have $10 million. He would disappear. He would take Monica and vanish to some non-extradition country and live like a king on the money I had bled for. "Cancel it," I said. "I can't," Saul whispered. "I signed the order. It is in the system. The only way to stop it now is a court order. And to get a court order, I need to prove you are alive. I need you to walk into a police station and let them fingerprint you." "No," I said, standing up. Saul looked confused. "Why not? It is the fastest way. Because if I go to the police now, Bradley will know. He will be alerted. He will run. Or worse, he will use that money to hire the best criminal defense team in the city. He will claim he made a mistake. He will claim he misidentified the body in his grief. He will get a slap on the wrist for insurance fraud, and he will still be my heir. He will still be the one who tried to kill me. I don't want him arrested, Saul. Not yet." "Then what do you want?" I walked to the window looking out at the city lights. I saw my reflection in the glass. The ghost. "I want him to suffer," I said. "I want him to feel what I felt in those woods. I want him to think he has won. I want him to taste the champagne. And then when he is at the very top of the mountain, thinking he owns the world, I want to push him off." I turned back to Saul. "I need access to the secondary accounts, the ones not in the trust, the offshore operational funds from the old business." Saul hesitated. "Garrison, those accounts are dormant. Accessing them might trigger red flags with the IRS if the owner is deceased." "I am not deceased, Saul. I am standing right here. And I need capital. I need to buy a suit. I need to hire a team. I need to rent a car. I am going to crash my own funeral reception, Saul. Or rather, the reading of the will." Saul looked at me. He saw the cold calculation in my eyes. He saw the risk assessor weighing the variables. He took a deep breath and reached into his desk drawer. He pulled out a black ledger and a heavy iron key. "The Cayman accounts," he said. "There is about 200,000 in liquid cash. It is not connected to your social security number. It is connected to the corporation." "Good," I said, taking the key. Saul stood up. "Garrison, you look like hell. You need a doctor. You need sleep." "I will sleep when this is over," I said. "Right now I have a son to educate." I turned to leave, but Saul stopped me. "Garrison," he said, his voice trembling, "that body in the car. If they killed someone to fake your death, this isn't just fraud. This is capital murder. If you go after them alone, they will kill you. They have nothing left to lose." I touched the scar on my shin where the forest had tried to eat me. "Neither do I, Saul. Neither do I." I left the office. I had money. I had an ally. And I had 7 days before the transfer went through. 7 days to build a trap. I went back to the motel. I sat on the bed and counted the cash Saul had given me from his office safe. $5,000 to start. I needed a phone that couldn't be traced. I needed a car that didn't exist on paper. And I needed to know exactly who Bradley owed money to. Because if Bradley was desperate enough to kill his father, he was desperate enough to make mistakes. And I was going to find every single one of them. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. I thought about the woods. I thought about the cold. I thought about the bitter taste of the orange juice. My son wanted a picnic. I was going to give him a banquet of consequences. And he was going to choke on every bite. The office air conditioning hummed with a low vibration that felt like the pulse of the building itself. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan was a grid of light and ambition. But inside Saul Blackwood's office, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of dead men's secrets. We had been working for hours. The bottle of Macallan was half empty, and the desk was covered in printouts spread like autopsy reports. But we weren't dissecting a body. We were dissecting my son's life. Saul sat at the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He had access to databases that most people didn't know existed. Credit bureaus were just the surface. Saul knew how to look into the dark corners of the financial world, the places where desperation leaves a digital footprint. I stood behind him, my hand resting on the back of his leather chair. My eyes scanned the glowing screen. I was looking for the motive. I knew they wanted money, but murder is an extreme solution. Murder is a high-risk strategy. People don't kill for comfort. They kill for survival. There it is, Saul whispered. He hit a key and a spreadsheet expanded, filling the monitor with rows of red numbers. It was a forensic accounting of Bradley's existence for the last 18 months. It was a disaster. It was a catastrophe of bad decisions fueled by arrogance and stupidity. Bradley had leveraged everything. He had taken out 3 mortgages on his house in Jersey, using forged income statements. He had maxed out 11 credit cards. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The real horror was in the investment accounts. He was shorting crypto, I said, my voice flat. He wasn't just shorting it, Garrison Saul said, pointing to a column of figures. He was trading on margin. He was betting money he didn't have on markets he didn't understand. Look at the dates. I leaned in. The dates corresponded with the tech crash 6 months ago. In a span of 48 hours, Bradley had lost $400,000. But he didn't stop. He doubled down. He tried to chase the loss. He went to the private lenders, I said. Saul nodded grimly. He pulled up another window. This wasn't a bank statement. It was a surveillance report from a private intelligence firm Saul used for background checks on high-stakes litigation. This is a list of known associates linked to a shell company called North Star Finance, Saul said. It sounds legitimate, but it isn't. It is a front for the Russian mob operating out of Brighton Beach. Bradley borrowed $500,000 from them 3 months ago at 10% interest. Weekly. I did the math in my head. The compounding interest. The penalties. He owes them close to $2 million, I whispered. More, Saul corrected. Look at the last transaction. 2 weeks ago. A transfer of $50,000. That was just the interest payment. And it bounced. I closed my eyes. The picture was becoming terrifyingly clear. Bradley wasn't just broke. He was a dead man walking. The mob doesn't foreclose on your house. They foreclose on your life. If he didn't pay them the principal soon, they would kill him. That was the timeline. That was why they couldn't wait for me to die of natural causes. That was why they needed the money now. The trip to the woods wasn't just greed. It was a frantic attempt to save his own skin. He traded my life for his. What about Monica? I asked. Is she just following him, or is she driving this? Saul minimized Bradley's file and opened another folder labeled Monica Ford. If Bradley is drowning, Monica is trying to buy a yacht, Saul said. He pulled up a real estate contract. It was a digital copy intercepted from a high-end brokerage firm server. She put a down payment on a penthouse, I said, reading the document. Not just any penthouse, Saul said. The Elysium Tower in Tribeca. $4.2 million. The deposit was non-refundable. $200,000. Where did she get $200,000, I asked. She didn't, Saul said. Look at the contingency clause. I read the fine print. The contract was signed pending funds from an estate settlement. The date of the closing was set for next Friday. Next Friday. 7 days from now. She is banking on the inheritance, I said. She has already spent the money, Garrison. She is so confident you are dead, and the trust will pay out, that she signed a legal contract for a $4 million apartment. It was breathtaking, the sheer audacity of it. Bradley was trying to pay off killers and Monica was trying to upgrade her lifestyle. They were a perfect storm of fear and avarice. They need the trust to unlock next week, I said. If it doesn't, they are finished. The mob kills Bradley. The real estate developers sue Monica for fraud. They lose everything. Saul took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. So we have them, Garrison. We go to the police with this. We show them the motive. A $2 million debt to the mob is a hell of a motive for patricide. The police will arrest them within the hour. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights were blurring together. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the coldness of the grave they had dug for me. Arresting them is too easy, Saul, I said. Saul spun his chair around. Too easy. Garrison, they tried to kill you. They burned a body to fake your death. Prison is exactly where they belong. Prison gives them structure, I said, turning back to him. Prison gives them 3 meals a day and a roof over their heads. Prison allows them to play the victim. They will tell their lawyers they were desperate. They will cry in front of a jury. They might even get a plea deal. I walked back to the desk and placed my hands on the leather surface, leaning in until I was face to face with Saul. I don't want them to just go to jail, Saul. I want them to feel the drop. What do you mean? Saul asked warily. I want them to believe they won, I said. I want Bradley to pay off the mob. I want Monica to move her furniture into that penthouse. I want them to sit in the lap of luxury and drink champagne and toast to my death. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel rich. And then I want to take it all away. Saul stared at me. You want to execute the Shadow Trust protocol? I nodded. But I want to modify it. The Shadow Trust was a mechanism we had designed years ago. In its original form, it was a defensive shield. If I died under suspicious circumstances, the trust would automatically freeze all assets for a 30-day audit period. It was meant to stop a gold digger or a coercer from running off with the cash. But a freeze would alert them, I said. If the money doesn't show up on Tuesday, they will panic. They will run, or they will fight. So what is the plan? Saul asked. We let the transfer go through, I said. Saul dropped his glass. It didn't break, but it spilled amber liquid across the papers. He ignored it. Are you insane, Garrison? If we transfer $10 million to Bradley, he will wire it to the Caymans in 10 minutes. We will never see it again. Not if we use a mirror account, I said. I paced the room, my mind working faster than it had in 20 years. You control the bank, Saul. You are on the board of directors. You can set up a dummy account, a mirror of the trust account. You can show them a balance. You can give them a debit card linked to a line of credit that looks like the trust but is actually controlled by us. Saul was listening now, his lawyer brain catching up to my risk assessment brain. We give them a view-only access, he muttered. We let them see the 10 million. We let them make transfers, but we set a 24-hour settlement period on all outgoing wires. Exactly, I said. We let them write the checks. We let Bradley wire the money to the mob. We let Monica wire the money to the real estate developer. The bank sends a confirmation code. Transaction pending. To them, it looks done. They will think the money is moving. And then Saul said, a slow smile spreading across his face. And then I said, we reject the transfers. Insufficient funds, account frozen, fraud alert. I sat down opposite him. Imagine it, Saul. Bradley calls the mob boss. He says the money is sent. The mob boss sees the pending notification. He backs off. Bradley thinks he is safe. Monica signs the final deed on the penthouse. She moves in. She throws a party. And then 24 hours later, the money bounces. The mob comes back, and this time they are angry because he lied to them. The real estate developer evicts Monica and sues her for breach of contract. They will be on the street. They will be hunted. They will have nothing. And that is when I walk in. Saul looked at me with a mixture of horror and admiration. That is diabolical, Garrison. It is dangerous. If the mob gets to Bradley before the police do, he is dead. That is a risk I am willing to take, I said coldly. He was willing to let me die in the woods. He was willing to let nature eat me. I am just returning the favor. I am letting his own nature eat him. Saul picked up the spilled glass and poured himself another drink. He didn't offer me one. He needed it more than I did. Okay, he said. We can do it. I can set up the Mirror account tomorrow. I can override the freeze on the main trust, but redirect the flow to the holding pen. It will look legitimate on paper. Good, I said. When is the reading of the will? Next Tuesday, Saul said. At my partner's office. I recused myself from the direct reading because of our friendship. Bradley insisted on a neutral party. Who is handling it? Jimenez. He is young, ambitious. He doesn't know about the Shadow Trust. He only knows what is in the main file. Perfect, I said. Let Jimenez read the will. Let him tell them they are rich. Let them sign the papers. I want to see their faces when they think they have won. You are going to be there, Saul asked. I shook my head. Not at the reading. If I show up too early, the shock will be too physical. They might have a heart attack or run out of the room. I want them to sign. I want their signatures on the acceptance of the estate. That makes them legally liable for the fraud. Once they sign for the money, they are confirming my death. That is the final nail in their coffin. So when do you reveal yourself? I leaned back in the chair, stretching my aching leg. I will wait until the money bounces, I said. I will wait until the panic sets in. I will wait until they are screaming at each other, trying to figure out where the $10 million went. Then I will come back from the dead. Saul looked at the file on his desk, the picture of the burned car, the picture of my watch. You know, Garrison, he said softly, there is one variable you haven't accounted for. What is that? The body, Saul said. If you come back, the police are going to ask who was in that car. If Bradley didn't kill him, if it was just a body he bought from a morgue or stole, that is one thing. But if he killed a drifter to fake your death, you are walking into a murder investigation. You will be a suspect too. They will ask why you waited, why you let them spend the money. I have thought about that, I said. That is why I need you to hire a private investigator. Not one of the corporate guys, someone who knows the streets. I need to know who died in that car. I need to know where Bradley got him. Saul nodded, writing on a legal pad. I know a guy. Ex-homicide. He can find out. Good. I stood up. My body was screaming for rest, but my mind was wired. One more thing, Saul. Yes. I need access to the penthouse security system, the Elysium Tower. If Monica is moving in, they will have given her access codes or temporary keys for the inspection. Saul raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I want to watch, I said. I want to see them celebrate. I want to see the moment the champagne turns to vinegar in their mouths. Saul sighed. He typed something into his computer. The Elysium is a smart building. The developer is a client of the firm. I can get you a guest login for the security feed. I will tell them we need to verify the asset for the trust. Thank you, Saul. I walked to the door. Garrison Saul called out. I turned. Be careful. When you corner a rat, it bites. I touched the brim of my baseball cap. I am not the rat, Saul. I am the exterminator. I left the office and melted back into the night. The city was loud, alive, and indifferent. I walked toward the subway, my hand in my pocket clutching the roll of cash. I had a week to kill, a week to prepare, a week to become someone else. I checked into a different motel this time in Brooklyn. I paid for the week in advance. I bought a burner laptop and an encrypted Wi-Fi hotspot. I spent the next 3 days turning that motel room into a war room. I printed out the bank statements Saul had sent to my secure email. I taped them to the wall. I drew lines connecting Bradley to the mob, to the crypto exchange, to the rental car company. I built a map of his desperation. I found the rental car agency. I hacked into their reservation system using an old password from my auditing days. Bradley had rented the SUV under his own name, but he had paid for the extra insurance. The walk-away insurance. He had planned the crash from the start. I found the listing for the penthouse. It was garish. Gold fixtures, marble floors, a view of the Hudson. It was everything Monica wanted, and everything she didn't deserve. I watched the security feed Saul had sent me. The apartment was empty, waiting for its new owners. It looked like a stage set for a tragedy. On the 4th day, the investigator Saul hired called me. His voice was gravelly like Miller's. Mr. Ford, I have an ID on your John Doe. Who was he? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. His name was Arthur Penhaligon, homeless veteran. Lived under the bridge near the expressway. He disappeared 3 days before your crash. Did they kill him? I asked the question hanging in the air like smoke. Medical examiner report was sealed, but I got a peek, the investigator said. No smoke in the lungs. I closed my eyes. That means he was dead before the fire started. Broken neck, the investigator said. Hyoid bone fracture. Someone strangled him or snapped his neck. It wasn't an accident. Thank you, I said. I hung up. So it was murder. They had killed a man, an innocent man who had survived a war, only to be murdered by my son for a payout. The rage I felt before was a candle compared to the inferno that roared to life inside me now. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. This was about retribution. Bradley wasn't just a thief. He was a killer. And Monica was his accomplice. They deserved everything that was coming to them. I looked at the wall covered in papers. The web of lies was complete. I had the motive. I had the method. I had the evidence. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into the trap. Tuesday came, the day of the reading. I sat in my motel room watching the clock. 10:00 a.m. They would be walking into Jimenez's office right now. They would be wearing black, trying to look somber. They would be holding hands, trying to stop their palms from sweating. I imagined Jimenez opening the file. I imagined him reading the words I had written 10 years ago. I leave my entire estate to my beloved son Bradley. I imagined the relief washing over them, the tears of joy, the signing of the papers. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to Saul. Execute. A moment later, a reply came back. Done. The transfer is initiated. 24-hour hold is active. I leaned back on the bed. The money was in the water. The sharks were circling, and the bait had just been taken. Now the real game began. I opened the laptop and logged into the bank's mirror site Saul had set up. I watched the numbers change. Balance $10, $500, $1,000. Status available. It was a lie. A beautiful digital lie. 10 minutes later, the activity started. Outgoing wire $2 $100, $1,000. Recipient North Star Finance LLC. Bradley was paying the mob. Outgoing wire for $200, $1,000. Recipient Elysium Development Corp. Monica was buying her castle. Outgoing wire $150,000. Recipient Portia of Manhattan. He was paying off the car. They were spending it. They were spending it all. In less than an hour, they had moved nearly $7 million. I watched the screen, my face illuminated by the cold blue light. Go ahead, kids, I whispered. Eat, drink, be merry, because tomorrow you die. The Tuesday morning sun dragged itself over the Brooklyn skyline, casting a gray pallor through the grime-streaked window of my motel room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the laptop burning a warm rectangle onto my thighs. My coffee was cold. My hands were steady. On the screen, a grainy, high-definition feed showed the interior of a conference room in Midtown Manhattan. It was the office of Ricardo Jimenez, a junior partner at Saul's firm. Saul had set the stage perfectly. The room was imposing, paneled in dark walnut, with a view of the Chrysler Building that screamed power and permanence. At 9:55, the door opened. Bradley walked in first. He was wearing the same charcoal suit from the party, but he had added a black tie. It was a costume, a prop designed to convey the somber gravity of a grieving son. But I saw the way his eyes darted around the room, assessing the furniture, checking the expensive artwork. He wasn't grieving. He was appraising. Monica followed him. She wore a veil, a literal black lace veil. It was so theatrical, so over the top, that I almost laughed out loud in the empty motel room. She clutched a Chanel handbag to her chest like a shield. Underneath that veil, I knew her eyes were sharp, calculating the seconds until the payoff. They sat down on the leather chairs opposite the empty desk. Bradley tapped his foot, a rapid staccato rhythm that betrayed his adrenaline. Monica reached out and placed a hand on his knee, not to comfort him, but to still him. "Stop it," she hissed. Her voice picked up clearly by the microphone Saul had concealed in the centerpiece. "You look guilty." "I am not guilty," Bradley snapped, whispering back. "I am impatient. If this guy doesn't show up in 5 minutes, I am going to scream. Do you know what day it is?" "It is Tuesday. The interest payment is due at noon. If I don't wire the funds by 11:30... He drew a finger across his throat. "Relax," Monica said, smoothing her skirt. "The old man is dead. The certificate is signed. It is just a formality now. We are rich, Bradley. We just have to sit here and look sad for 20 minutes. Just then, the door opened again, and Jimenez entered. He was young, sharp, and looked suitably grave. He carried a thick file folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Ford," he said, shaking their hands. "Please accept my deepest condolences. I worked with your father on several occasions. He was a brilliant man." Bradley nodded, sniffing loudly. He dabbed at dry eyes. "Thank you. It has been a nightmare. We just want to honor his wishes." Monica nodded behind her veil. "He loved us so much. We just want to bring this chapter to a close." I watched from my digital perch, feeling a cold detachment. They were good. If I hadn't heard them plotting my murder, I might have believed them. They played the part of the bereaved children perfectly. Jimenez sat down and opened the file. He adjusted his glasses. As you know, Mr. Ford, your father placed the majority of his assets into a blind trust some years ago. The terms of that trust dictate that upon his death, the assets are to be liquidated and transferred to the primary beneficiary. Bradley leaned forward. And I am the primary beneficiary. Jimenez nodded. You are the sole beneficiary. The air in the room seemed to electrify. I could see the tension leaving Bradley's shoulders, replaced by a hunger that was almost feral. Jimenez continued reading the legal boilerplate. He talked about tax liabilities, about probate periods, about the transfer of deeds. Bradley and Monica were nodding, but they weren't listening. They were waiting for the number. Finally, Jimenez turned a page. As of this morning, the total value of the trust, including the liquidity from the sale of Ford Risk Management and the current real estate holdings, stands at $10,542,000. The silence that followed lasted exactly 1 second. 10 million, Bradley whispered. Monica ripped the veil off her head. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide and glittering. 10.5. Jimenez slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is the authorization for the transfer. Once you sign this, the funds will be moved from the trust holding account to your personal joint account. Due to the size of the transfer, it may take up to 24 hours to fully clear, but the funds will be visible in your balance immediately. Bradley grabbed the pen. He didn't read the document. He didn't ask about taxes. He didn't ask about charitable donations. He just signed his name. He signed it so hard the pen tore through the paper. He pushed the paper back to Jimenez. Done. Jimenez signed the bottom line. He stamped it. Congratulations, Mr. Ford. The transfer is initiated. You are now the owner of the Ford estate. Bradley stood up. He didn't shake Jimenez's hand. He didn't say thank you. He turned to Monica and let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the mahogany walls. We did it, baby. We did it. Monica jumped up and threw her arms around him. They kissed, a passionate, aggressive kiss fueled by dopamine and greed. Jimenez looked uncomfortable. I will let you have a moment, he said, retreating from the room. The moment the door clicked shut, the transformation was complete. The grieving children vanished. In their place were 2 lottery winners who had just gotten away with a heist. Bradley reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver flask. He unscrewed the cap and took a long swig, then handed it to Monica. To the old man, he shouted, raising the flask to the ceiling. To his stubborn, cheap, miserable soul, may he rot in hell. Monica drank, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. He finally did something right. She laughed. He died. I watched them on my screen, my coffee forgotten. This was it. This was the confession I needed. Not for the police, but for myself. To know that I wasn't crazy for doing what I was about to do. Bradley pulled out his phone. His fingers were flying. Who are you calling? Monica asked, sitting on the edge of the desk, her legs swinging. I am calling Vlad Bradley, said his voice thick with triumph. I am going to tell him his money is coming. I am going to tell him to call off his dogs. He put the phone on speaker. It rang twice. Yeah, a heavy Russian voice answered. Vlad, it is Bradley. I am at the lawyer's. The money is moving. I am wiring you the full 2 million plus the vigorish. Right now. There was a pause on the line. You have the money. I have it, Bradley said, puffing out his chest. I told you. My father came through. Send it, the Russian said. If it is not in my account by tonight, I come to your house. And I don't knock. It is coming, Bradley said. Check your account in an hour. We are square, Vlad. We are done. He hung up and let out a breath that shook his whole body. He slumped into the chair, laughing hysterically. I am alive, Monica. I am alive. He didn't kill me. Monica walked over and massaged his shoulders. Of course he didn't. We handled it. We did what we had to do. Bradley looked up at her, his eyes wet. You know, for a minute in the woods, I thought he was going to wake up. When I put him under that tree, he looked so peaceful. I almost what? Monica snapped, her voice sharp. Almost backed out. Almost let us lose everything. No, Bradley said, hardening. No, I did it. I walked away. I left him there. And thank God you did, Monica said. She pulled out her own phone. Now it is my turn. She dialed a number. Hello, Stefan. It is Monica Ford. Yes, we are ready to close on the penthouse. The funds are available. Yes, today. I want the keys by 5. I want to have dinner on my terrace tonight. She listened for a moment, smiling. Yes, wire the full deposit plus the first year's maintenance fees. We are paying cash for the upgrades, too. I want the marble floors in the master bath. The Italian marble. Yes, do it. She hung up and spun around in a circle, her black dress flaring out. $4 million, Bradley. A view of the Hudson. A doorman. No more renting. No more hiding. We are going to be the kings of New York. Bradley took another drink from the flask. You know, he said, his voice slurring slightly, what the best part is. What? Monica asked breathlessly. The best part is that he never spent a dime on us, Bradley said, his face twisting into a sneer. He sat on that money for years. He drove that piece of junk car. He made me beg for rent money. He watched me drown, Monica. He watched me struggle, and he had $10 million sitting in a vault. He hated me. He must have hated me. He didn't hate you, Monica said dismissively. He was just a selfish old miser. He thought he was teaching you a lesson. Well, look who learned the lesson now. Yeah, Bradley laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. He learned that gravity works. I flinched in the motel room. Gravity. He tripped, he whispered to himself, mimicking the story they told the police. He tripped and fell. Oops. They weren't talking about the car crash. They were talking about the cliff. Wait, Monica said, freezing. Did you transfer the money to the car dealership? Not yet, Bradley said, fumbling with his banking app. I am doing it now. 150 large, the Porsche is mine. No more lease, title in hand. He tapped the screen. Boom. Sent. Vlad sent. Porsche sent. Your apartment sent. He looked at the balance on the screen. We still have 4 million left, he said, his eyes wide. 4 million liquid. Monica, we can do anything. We can go to Saint-Tropez. We can buy a boat. Let's book first-class tickets for tomorrow, Monica said. I want to get out of the city. I want to go somewhere warm where nobody knows us. Done, Bradley said. Paris. We will go to Paris. We will shop on the Champs-Élysées. We will drink wine that costs more than my dad's car. They toasted again, clinking the flask against the side of the desk. To Garrison Ford, Monica said, smirking. The best father-in-law a girl could ask for. Because he is dead. Bradley laughed. To the old bastard. Thanks for the cash, Dad. Hope the fire was warm. I closed the laptop. I sat in the silence of the motel room, the echo of their laughter still ringing in my ears. I felt a coldness spreading through my veins, a numbness that replaced the pain. They had spent nearly $7 million in 20 minutes. They had paid off the mob. They had bought a penthouse. They had bought a car. They were booking flights to Paris. They thought the money was real. They thought the transfer had cleared. They didn't know that Saul was sitting in his office 2 floors down, watching the same transfers hit the Mirror account. They didn't know that he was flagging every single one of them. Transaction pending. That was all they saw. But in the banking world, pending can mean a lot of things. It can mean processing. Or it can mean under review. Tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., the notifications would change. Insufficient funds, account frozen, fraud alert. The wire to the Russian mob would bounce. Vlad would check his account and see nothing. He wouldn't call Bradley to ask what happened. He would send a car. The wire to the real estate developer would fail. The contract Monica signed was binding. Without the funds, she would be in breach. They would sue her for the deposit she didn't have. The Porsche dealership would report the car stolen, and the airline tickets would be canceled. They were celebrating on the edge of a volcano, and the ground was about to open up. I stood up and paced the small room. My leg was healing, but it still ached. The physical pain was grounding. It reminded me of the woods. It reminded me of the cold. They laughed about gravity. They laughed about the fire. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. The beard was fuller now. The eyes were harder. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a predator. I picked up the burner phone. I dialed Saul's number. "It is done," he answered on the first ring. "They signed. The transfers are initiated. I have flagged them all." "Good," I said. Garrison Saul said, his voice hesitant. "I heard them. On the feed. The things they said. I know, Saul. I am sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't realize how much they hated you." "It is better this way," I said. "No ambiguity, no doubts." "What happens now?" Saul asked. "Now we wait," I said. "We wait for the sun to rise. We wait for the emails to start bouncing. We wait for the panic. And then I come home." I hung up. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I watched the ceiling fan spin a slow, hypnotic circle. Tomorrow was the day. The resurrection. I imagined Bradley's face when his card was declined. I imagined Monica's face when the realtor told her to get out. But mostly, I imagined the moment they saw me. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to be calm. I was going to be the professional. I was going to give them the final risk assessment of their lives. And the result was going to be total loss. The night dragged on. The city sounds outside faded into a low hum. I checked my watch, the cheap plastic digital one I had bought at the thrift store. 3:00 a.m. 6 hours. In 6 hours, the illusion would break. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a week, I let myself feel the grief. Not for myself, but for the family that never existed. For the lies I had told myself for years. That Bradley was just going through a phase. That Monica was just ambitious. That they loved me deep down. The forest had stripped away those lies. The truth was brutal and sharp. They were wolves, and I had been the sheep. But now the sheep had fangs, and the wolves were trapped. I waited for the dawn. I waited for the fire. This time I wasn't the one who was going to burn. The pen scratched against the paper. It was a dry, harsh sound in the quiet opulence of the conference room. I watched the monitor in the motel room one last time, seeing Bradley press down with the full weight of his greed. He signed his name with a flourish, a signature that he believed unlocked a kingdom. Jimenez witnessed it. The stamp came down. Thump. It was done. The legal transfer was initiated. The trap was sprung. I closed the laptop. I stood up and smoothed the lapels of my suit. It was a charcoal, three-piece bespoke wool cut by the finest tailor in Manhattan, paid for with cash from the Cayman account. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My beard was shaved, leaving only a trimmed gray goatee that made me look harder, sharper. The ghost of the Catskills was gone. Garrison Ford, the CEO, had returned. I walked out of the motel room and into the waiting black town car I had hired. The driver held the door. We drove in silence toward Midtown. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. It was the rhythm of a judge's gavel. We pulled up to the office building. I didn't use the service entrance this time. I walked through the front doors. The security guard stopped me for a fraction of a second, then recognized the suit, the walk, the air of absolute authority. They stepped aside. I rode the elevator up. 42nd floor. When the doors opened, I wasn't alone. Waiting for me in the lobby as arranged were 3 men. Saul Blackwood stood in the middle, looking pale but determined. To his left was District Attorney Marcus Stone, a man known for his hatred of white-collar fraud. To his right was Sheriff Miller. Not the trapper I met in the woods, but his brother, the county sheriff of Ulster, wearing his uniform, his hat tucked under his arm, his face set in stone. Ready? Saul asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. Open the door. We walked down the hallway. I could hear laughter coming from the conference room. Bradley and Monica were celebrating. They were toasting their victory. Saul reached the double doors. He didn't knock. He threw them open with both hands. The heavy wood slammed against the walls with a crack like a gunshot. The laughter inside died instantly. Bradley was standing by the window, a glass of champagne halfway to his lips. Monica was sitting on the edge of the desk, scrolling through her phone, probably looking for furniture for the penthouse. Jimenez jumped in his seat. They all turned. And they saw me. I stepped into the room. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked to the head of the table. I looked at Bradley. I looked at the color drain from his face, leaving him looking like wet dough. I saw his eyes bulge, his mouth open and close like a fish on a hook. He dropped the glass. It didn't break on the carpet, it just bounced, spilling expensive vintage champagne all over his new Italian shoes. Dad, he whispered. It was a sound of pure terror. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just cornered a rabbit. I heard you kids threw a grand farewell party for me yesterday, I said, my voice filling the room calm and resonant. Pity the guest of honor is late. Monica made a sound in the back of her throat, a strangled gasp. She scrambled off the desk, backing away until she hit the wall. Her hands flew to her mouth. She was staring at me, but she wasn't seeing her father-in-law. She was seeing a corpse walking. She was seeing her penthouse evaporating. Bradley started to shake. It started in his hands, then moved to his knees. He grabbed the back of a chair to hold himself up. You are dead, he stammered. We buried you. We saw the car. We saw the body. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, heavy file. I tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished surface until it stopped right in front of him. You buried a stranger, Bradley, I said. You buried a man you murdered to take my place. But you didn't bury me. You just made me angry. No, Bradley screamed. No, this is a trick. You are a ghost. I left you in the woods. You couldn't survive. No one could survive. I stepped closer. I survived, son, because I am not the weak old man you thought I was. I survived because I had to come back to teach you one final lesson. I pointed to the man in the uniform. Do you know Sheriff Miller from Ulster County? His jurisdiction covers the woods where you abandoned me. And this is District Attorney Stone. He is very interested in the paperwork you just signed. Bradley looked at the lawman, and his legs finally gave out. He collapsed. He didn't just sit down, he crumpled to the floor, his expensive suit bunching up around him. A dark stain began to spread across the front of his trousers. The smell of urine mixed with the smell of spilled champagne. He was weeping now, sobbing into his hands. Not tears of remorse. Tears of a child who knows the boogeyman has come for him. Monica was frozen against the wall. She was smarter than him. She was doing the math. She was looking at the DA. She was looking at the file. It wasn't me, she whispered, her voice trembling. It was him. It was all Bradley. He made me do it. He said he would kill me if I didn't help. I laughed. A dry, humorless bark. Save it, Monica. I opened the file. I spread the photos out on the table like a tarot reading of their doom. Here is Exhibit A, I said, pointing to a grainy black and white photo. This is the security camera footage from the Sleepy Hollow Motel in Kingston. Dated 3 days ago. That is me buying a soda from the vending machine at the exact moment you claimed I was driving the rental car off the cliff. That is my alibi. I was 20 miles away watching reruns of Law & Order while you were torching a stranger. I pulled out another sheet. A digital readout. And here is Exhibit B. You thought you were clever renting a car with a manual GPS tracker so you could ditch it. But you forgot that modern cars have black boxes. They record everything. Telemetry, speed, braking, and audio inside the cabin. Bradley looked up from the floor, his face streaked with snot and tears. Audio, he wheezed. I nodded. I hired a digital forensics team to recover the cloud data from the rental agency's server. Do you want to hear it? I didn't wait for an answer. I pulled a small digital recorder from my pocket and pressed play. Bradley's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the room. Is he asleep yet? Monica's voice replied. Yeah, the sedative worked. He is out cold. Bradley again. Okay, pull over here. The ravine is deep. We put the drifter in the driver's seat. Make sure you put Dad's watch on him. And the ring. It has to look like him. Monica. Just do it, Bradley. Pour the gasoline. I want this over. I want my money. I clicked the recorder off. The silence in the room was absolute. Jimenez, the young lawyer, looked like he was going to be sick. He was staring at his clients with horror. That is conspiracy to commit murder, I said. That is insurance fraud. That is identity theft. And since the man you burned was a veteran named Arthur Penhaligon, that is federal. I looked down at my son. He was curled in a fetal position, rocking back and forth. And this, I said, pointing to the paper he had just signed, the ink still wet. This is the nail in the coffin. By signing this, you legally attested that I was dead. You accepted the funds based on a fraudulent death certificate. That is grand larceny. Monica peeled herself off the wall. She tried to walk toward me, her hands held out in a pleading gesture. Garrison, please. We were desperate. We owe money. Bad people. They were going to kill us. We didn't want to hurt you. We just needed you to disappear for a while. We would have come back for you." "Liar," I snapped. "You left me with no water, no food. In bear country, you didn't want me to disappear. You wanted me to rot. You wanted me to be bones by the time anyone found me." I turned to the DA. "Mr. Stone, I believe you have everything you need." The DA nodded. He signaled to the sheriff. "Bradley Ford. Monica Ford. You are under arrest for the murder of Arthur Penhaligon, the attempted murder of Garrison Ford fraud, and grand larceny." The sheriff stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked as he ratcheted them onto Bradley's wrists. Bradley didn't resist. He was broken. He was a shell. Monica, however, fought. She screamed. She scratched at the deputy who came to assist. "My penthouse," she shrieked. "My deposit. You can't do this. I am buying the penthouse today." The DA looked at her with disgust. "You aren't buying anything, Mrs. Ford. Your assets are frozen. The deposit is seized as evidence of proceeds of crime. You are going to a cell, not a penthouse." They dragged them out. I watched my son being hauled away, his expensive shoes dragging on the carpet. He looked at me one last time. "Dad," he whimpered. "Dad, help me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had traded my life for a watch and a car. "I don't have a son," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "My son died in those woods. You are just a stranger who owes me money." The doors closed. The screaming faded down the hallway. I stood alone in the conference room with Saul and Jimenez. Jimenez was shaking. "Mr. Ford," he said, I had no idea. I thought." "It is okay, son," I said gently. "You did your job. You set the trap." I looked at Saul. He poured 2 glasses of scotch from the decanter on the sideboard. His hands were shaking too. "It is over, Garrison," he said, handing me a glass. "They are gone. You got them." I took the drink. I looked at the amber liquid. "It is not over, Saul. Not yet. There is one more thing. What Saul asked. I picked up the file, the one containing the trust documents. The money," I said. "The $10 million. What about it?" "It is safe. We froze the Mirror account. They didn't get a dime." "I know," I said, "but I don't want it." Saul choked on his drink. "You don't want it. Garrison, that is your life's work. It is blood money now," I said. "It is the bait that caught the rats. Every time I look at a statement, I will see Bradley's face. I will see the woods." I took a pen from the desk. I turned to the last page of the trust agreement, the section on charitable remainders. "I want you to liquidate the trust, Saul. All of it. The penthouse deposit if we get it back. The cars, the watch, everything. And then, I want you to set up a foundation," I said, writing as I spoke. "The Arthur Penhaligon Fund for Homeless Veterans. Use the money to build shelters. Use it to get guys like the man my son murdered off the streets. Use it to give them a name so they don't end up as John Does in a burning car." Saul stared at me. "All of it, Garrison. You will be, well, not poor, but you won't be rich. I have my pension," I said. "I have my townhouse if I decide to keep it. I have enough." I realized something in those woods, Saul. I realized that the only thing of value I had was my life, and I almost lost it because of this money. I signed the document. Garrison Ford. I pushed it across the table. Make it happen. Saul nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in his eyes. He took the paper. It will be done. I finished my drink. I set the glass down. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was fully up now. The streets were filled with people rushing to work, rushing to make money, rushing to build their little empires. I felt light, lighter than I had felt in years. The weight of the secret fortune was gone. The weight of my son's failure was gone. I was just Garrison Ford, a man who had survived. I turned and walked out of the office. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out into the bright, noisy, chaotic street. I took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of exhaust and hot dog carts and possibilities. I hailed a cab, whereto the driver asked. "Take me to Queens," I said. "I have a garden that needs tending, and I think I am going to buy a dog." As the cab pulled away into traffic, I didn't look back. The picnic was over. The ants had been scattered, and I was finally truly awake. The hallway leading to the elevators was long and lined with cold marble. It was a walk of shame, not for me, but for the two people being marched out in handcuffs. I followed them at a distance, flanked by Saul and the district attorney. The silence of the office had been replaced by the crackle of police radios and the heavy tread of boots. Bradley was weeping openly now, a wet, undignified sound that echoed off the walls. He stumbled, his expensive Italian shoes catching on the carpet, but the officer, gripping his arm, jerked him upright without a word. Monica had gone catatonic. Her face was a mask of smeared mascara and shock, her eyes fixed on a future that now consisted of concrete walls and prison jumpsuits. Her Chanel bag, the shield she had used to deflect the world for so long, lay abandoned on the conference room floor, a relic of a life that was already over. We reached the lobby. It was a chaotic scene. Uniformed officers were holding back a small crowd of curious onlookers who had gathered to see the spectacle. The flashing red and blue lights from the cruisers outside cut through the glass doors, painting the lobby in violent strokes of color. There was one loose thread that needed to be tied before the final curtain fell. Leo. My grandson. He was 6 years old currently, with a nanny in the rented house in Jersey, unaware that his world had just detonated. He was innocent of his parents' sins, but he was a victim of them nonetheless. I couldn't raise him. I was too old, too broken by this betrayal, and every time I looked at him, I knew I would see the shadow of his father. But I wouldn't leave him to the wolves of the foster system. I had already made the call to my sister Sarah in Oregon. She was tough fare and lived far away from the toxic legacy of New York. She had agreed to take him. I signed the temporary guardianship papers right there on the hood of a police cruiser, while the wind whipped my coat around my legs. I would pay for everything: his school, his therapy, his life. But I added a stipulation to the trust I set up for him. He would not receive a dime of cash until he was 30, and only then if he could prove he had built a life of his own. He would grow up chopping wood and earning his keep. He would learn the value of a dollar the hard way, so he would never become the monster his father was. As the officers began to load them into separate cars, reality seemed to finally pierce the fog of Bradley's panic. He saw me standing on the sidewalk, the wind ruffling my gray hair, looking not like a victim, but like a judge. He twisted his body, fighting the restraints, slamming his shoulder against the doorframe of the cruiser. He locked eyes with me. For a second, I saw the toddler I used to push on the swings in the park. Then I saw the teenager I taught to drive. And finally, I saw the man who had driven away from me in the woods without looking back. Dad, he screamed, his voice raw and desperate. Dad, please. Look at me. I am your son. You can't let them take me. It was her idea. She made me do it. Dad, save me. The plea hung in the air, pathetic and piercing. He was still doing it. Still blaming others. Still expecting me to be the safety net. Still expecting me to write a check to fix his broken life. He truly believed that the bond of blood was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I walked slowly toward the car. The officer stepped back to let me pass, his hand resting on his holster. I leaned down until my face was inches from the window. I looked deep into Bradley's eyes. I looked for a spark of remorse, a shred of humanity. I found only fear and selfishness. You are mistaken, I said, my voice as dry and cold as the leaves I had slept in for 3 nights. Bradley stopped crying for a second, hope flickering in his eyes. My son died 3 days ago in the Catskills. I continued, my voice not wavering. He died the moment he drove away and left an old man to rot. The man sitting before me is just a stranger with a debt he can never pay, and a stranger who murdered a hero named Arthur to cover his own tracks. I stood up and signaled to the officer. Take him away. No! Bradley howled, thrashing against the seat as the door slammed shut. No, Dad. Don't do this. I am your boy. I am your boy. The car pulled away, sirens wailing a mournful song that faded into the city traffic. I watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner. I felt nothing. No sorrow. No regret. Only a profound, hollow silence where my heart used to be. I turned back to the building. Saul was waiting for me, holding the file that contained the $10 million. The blood money. The bait. We went back up to the office. The conference room still smelled of stale champagne and fear. I sat down at the table and Saul placed the checkbook in front of me. What do you want to do with it? Garrison Saul asked softly. It is yours. You earned it. You survived for it. I looked at the numbers. $10 million. It could buy a private island. It could buy a fleet of cars. It could buy anything but the one thing I wanted, which was a family that didn't want to kill me. It tastes like ash, Saul, I said. I don't want it. If I keep it, I become them. If I keep it, it wins. I picked up the pen. I want you to liquidate everything. The penthouse deposit once the lawyers claw it back. The Porsche. The accounts. Every single cent. And then Saul asked. I wrote a name on the check. The Arthur Penhaligon Foundation for Homeless Veterans. Give it to them, I said. Use it to build shelters. Use it to get men like the one my son murdered off the streets. Use it to give them a name so they don't end up as John does in a burning car. That is the only way to wash this money clean. Saul stared at the check. He nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in his eyes. He took the paper as if it were fragile. It will be done, Garrison. And you? What will you do? I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city, at the millions of lights, each one a life, each one a story of risk and reward. I am going home, I said. That night, I sat in the living room of my modest townhouse in Queens. It was quiet. The police tape had been removed from the front door. The funeral wreaths had been taken away by the sanitation crew. The house was exactly as I had left it, yet it felt completely different. It was no longer a waiting room for death. It was a fortress of survival. I poured a glass of cheap red wine, the kind Bradley used to sneer at, because it didn't have a cork. I sat in my old armchair, the one with the worn velvet upholstery. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't look at my phone. I looked out the window toward the north, toward the mountains that were supposed to be my tomb. The forest was out there, indifferent and wild. It had tried to kill me, but it had also saved me. It had stripped away the lies and shown me the truth about who I was and who my family was. I was alone. My wife was gone. My son was gone. My legacy was gone. But as I took a sip of the wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, I realized I had something more valuable than all of that. I had my life. I had my dignity. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served cold and absolute. I was safe. The wolves were in cages. The game was over. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the memory of Arthur Penhaligon, and to the man I used to be. "The picnic is over," I whispered to the silence, and for the first time in a long time I closed my eyes and slept a dreamless, peaceful sleep. In my 40 years of risk assessment, I learned to spot dangers in market trends and corporate mergers, but I missed the black swan event sitting at my own dinner table. The most dangerous blind spot is love. I thought shielding my son from the weight of wealth would build his character. Instead, my silence only fed his entitlement. I learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and DNA doesn't dictate morality. The hardest thing a parent can do is accept that their child is broken beyond repair. True peace didn't come from saving the money. It came from cutting the rot out of my life, even if it meant standing alone. If you believe that betrayal should never go unpunished, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you have donated the $10 million, or would you have kept it for a new life?